Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I am very pleased on this episode to be talking with someone who has a rather impressive, colorful background there, Brendan Albetski, comics creator Brendan Albetski. Thank you, Brendan, for jumping in and joining and bringing the visual along with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jason. I'm really happy to be here. I'm really excited to talk about all my books, including the brand new one. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you. I know the project that we're talking about is Maru Kiru, the latest of that adventure and saga. So glad to be talking about that.
hmm
And curious by means of a first question, that origins question. How did you get started in the world of writing, creating, and I'm told there is a college newspaper as well.
Yeah. I specifically warned you that I would talk forever about the college newspaper if I go unchecked. But yes, I before I was an artist, I was a writer. My initial goal when I was a teenager was I wanted to be a novelist. I wanted to write novels. When I got to college and I got into doing that, and I even got to the point where I was doing an independent study where I was drafting a novel. I kind of realized that I didn't really want to write novels, and I was in close to my senior year. I was actually in my senior year, and uh, and I really wasn't sure what I was going to do with myself because I had kind of picked a long shot anyways, and now I'd put all my eggs in that basket, and I didn't want to do it anymore. So there was a job opening at the Connecticut Daily Campus, which is the student newspaper at the University of Connecticut, with a circulation of around 9,000 copies. Or at least it was when I was there 15 years ago. It's probably much larger now. Um, but they all had a job opening for a comics editor, and there was
Mhm.
a comics page in that paper which had a lot of all student created comics on it that didn't run anything from syndication, which I thought was awesome. And it was the kind of comics that you would read them, and I would say, I could do that. I could draw that if I tried hard enough. And so I applied for the job of comics editor with zero experience, and I got the job because I was the only person who applied, which worked out pretty well. And I had a friend who drew a comic for me that I wrote, and then I had another one that I also started to draw just because I was the editor and I could put whatever I wanted to on the page, and I got paid $5 for every strip. So I said, why not double dip? Which is not necessarily the most ethically good way to do business, but he had 10 or 12 other different student artists on the team, so I felt like it was okay. But that was how I kind of got started doing comics. And I really got obsessed with the idea of the graphic novel, and I wanted to do graphic novels instead of literary novels. And I had a lot of artist friends. They all went to art school, and I thought that I could be really cool and just get them to work on, my graphic novel magnum opus. And as I was talking about with a few people at IC3 this past weekend, I'm mature enough to admit now that I was kind of a bear to work with for my artist friends. So it got to the point where I was just like, well, how hard could it really be to draw comics? I will just do this all myself. Um, and I think within a year or so, I'm probably going to be good enough to just be rattling these things off. And that was a huge mistake, huge, huge, huge mistake. It's extremely hard to become an artist. It's something that I think is worth it because it's become like my life's calling. But it's like I think I'd spent more like 10 years building up to a point where I was really comfortable with my work and publishing it in a graphic novel format. And that's kind of where we run into the first volume of Maru Kiru Destroy the Moon, was
Mhm.
around that 10-year mark. And it's been about 5 years since that now. So um, I've been working on the series the entire time throughout that. It's my passion project, it's my personal series, my creator-owned series. I work on a ton of work for hire stuff in addition to that, but I'm always making a special case to carve out time to do Maru Kiru. And the reason I crowdfunded is because I do want to have control over every aspect of that process. So, I'm all the jobs on the book. I'm the writer, I'm the artist, I'm the letterer, I'm the publisher. If I had a printing press in my basement, I would print it as well, but I don't. Maybe someday.
Yeah,
That's kind of the
yeah,
long and short
that's
of it. I try not to go too long, but
that's the next phase, right? Printing it
Mm,
yourself and doing. Yeah.
absolutely.
Now, when it comes to inspiration, when it comes to the kinds of stories that you like to tell, what are those ingredients for you?
I'm a huge fan of Conan the Barbarian,
Hmm.
both
Hmm.
primarily as the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. That was my first exposure to the character, my first exposure to the property. But I have also read all the Robert E. Howard stories, which I love, and a lot of the comics I've read. I have the Marvel Omnibus of the Savage Sword Conan comics. I've read through that. Jason Aaron did a fantastic run. I'm I'm doing a disservice to the artist that worked on that book. Drop it in the description, please, because I hate it when people only mention the writer on books like that, especially because that's a beautiful book too. Um, but I'm a huge fan of Conan. And the kind of a lot of the early pulp authors that have really influenced the pop culture that we have in so many ways. Lovecraft, Howard, those are the big two that I'm thinking about.
Hmm.
The ideas are really impactful, but the context that they deliver with them is oftentimes fraught with problems, racial problems, sexism problems, things that make it so that you have when you want to hand this book. I have a young cousin who is getting into doing this kind of stuff too, and whenever I want to give them a piece of inspiration, I don't want to have to come with a writer of like, oh, by the way, there's a bunch of racial slurs in here that I'm just going to want you to gloss over. I
Hmm.
wanted to create something that captured the spirit of pulp serials and really bombastic, stories and savage fantasy kind of things that wasn't burdened by all of the extra BS that came along with the prejudices of the people that created that material in the 30s. So that's kind of where the inspiration for this started. The actual comic itself, I was looking for a way around to a project like this, and the actual concept for Maru Kiru Destroy the Moon itself was really a pantser moment. My friend Scott Madrinsky, who ran a bunch of really cool trading card charity collaborations that I did. I was in a couple of X-Men ones, and he did a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles one. They're all great. I did a bunch of trading cards for it. It was awesome. But he asked me, he was always a fan of my work and very supportive. And he asked me one day, he says, like, well, you've been talking about doing like a comic or graphic novel for a long time now. Like, what are you going to do? What's the pitch for that? And I just kind of said, it's barbarians that want to blow up the moon. Because I wanted something that
Hmm.
sounded ridiculous and bombastic. And that's what I said. And he said, wow, that sounds so awesome. I want to read that book. So I'm like, all right, that's what it's going to be then. And I whittled it down to one barbarian. It was originally going to be a whole group of them. But I whittled it down to the one. And I just kind of went from there. And, I've gone through a couple iterations of the early story. And in the original first printing of the first volume, there's a lot of back material about the development of the character of the comic. And there's even some prototype chapters that did not make the final cut that are in
Hmm.
that version. That's out of print now. I don't think that's ever going to get printed again. So if you have one of those, I think there's only 150 copies of that were ever printed. So if you have one of those, you have a rare object there. I don't plan on printing that back material again anytime soon, so treasure that.
That's nice. What was it like stepping into that creator-owned space and kind of getting to tell the story the way you wanted to tell it? Were there some lessons learned there as you were stepping in?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's lessons learned every day.
Hmm.
I made a bunch of stupid mistakes as an artist that that I'm still learning from now. The thing I'm talking about the most now is like what if I ever go back and do another printing of that first volume, I'm gonna re-letter the whole thing. Because looking back at it now, it's like looking at some of my lettering, it's like, why was I making decisions like that? I know so much more about the craft now. But the interesting thing about the series is that it tracks, kind of my journey as an artist. I was never very concerned about maintaining the consistency of the style in the way that
Hmm.
I said, oh, chapter one looked like this, and now the whole series has to look like that. I did chapter one a certain way, and chapter two, I did a little bit better job. I kind of figured some things out, and things looked a little bit different, a little bit better. And it's like, well, do I go back and I redraw chapter one? No, I move on to chapter three, and so on and so forth as the series goes. And um, so there's development there. And I'm still proud of the work I did in the beginning. I think to myself, you look at stuff I'm doing for volume three, the interior previews that you can see on the Kickstarter page for the first issue of volume three. And it's light years away from what I was doing in the beginning. And I've thought to myself, like, should I go back and redraw that first volume? But the answer is no, because when I got all my original fans, when I got all the people who were originally passionate about the book, and I started getting fan art for the book way faster than I mean, the only time I've ever gotten fan art for anything I've ever done. So, way faster than anything I'd ever done. Those people fell in love with those first chapters, the way they looked as they are. And I'm not going to go back and change that now. So that's definitely
Hmm.
a lesson that I've learned as a creator. But going to the creator-owned space is really always kind of been like my dream and where I want to be. That's the people that I definitely admire the most, and I admired the most when I was starting to get into comics, live in that space. So like your Mike Mignola is a big one for me. Joe Mad is another one that I kind of admire from that space of just like this is my comic, this is my property. I'm gonna do with it whatever I want, and nobody's gonna tell me any different. Mignola obviously Hellboy, wildly successful property
Hmm.
and very very consistent, very prolific artist in Mike Mignola. Joe Mad being kind of the opposite, in that every comic that he ever released was a beautiful masterpiece, but he would take 2 years to draw an issue. But again, it was his comic, and nobody was going to tell him to hurry it up.
Right, right.
So I always have kind of really admired that, and that's who I've wanted to be in comics. And on social media all the time, you get asked, like, what's your dream property? What's the dream property that you want to work on as an artist? And I feel like I'm the only guy out there who's being like my own. This is the dream property. This is what I want to do. I'm already doing it.
Yeah, yeah. Living the dream, as they say.
Mm. But in a non-cynical, non-ironic sense, I really am.
Yeah, yeah. Now, looking at the art, I love the style, the color, the boldness. There are two words that stand out, which I love these in combination, fantasy and pulp. So I'm
Mm.
curious about the impact that that's had for you as a creator and the impact that you hope it has through the book.
Yeah, it's huge, definitely. I rely heavily on kinetic action. I like big, big hits landing moments. Rich
Mhm.
Corbin is a big influence for me, and I feel like Corbin does a lot of that in his books. One of my favorite Corbin panels, I think it's must be from Den, but it's a lizard man punching somebody in the face and just totally caving that guy's face in. And there's an homage panel to that specific thing that I'm talking about in Maru Kiru, actually, in chapter 6, which is the first chapter of volume 2. Manitatis, who's the main villain of the piece, does that same punch and caves somebody's face in. And I just wanted to put that in because that's how that panel's had such a huge impact on me.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so I want it to be big and splashy and easily accessible. And there is a pretty deep story that's going on in the background of all these big splashy action scenes. I list Gene Wolfe as being somebody who influenced me a lot, and I think Gene Wolfe is an incredibly cerebral writer, and I feel like if you just look at Maru Kiru on the surface, you would say, "What the hell do you think you're talking about with with saying that Gene Wolfe influenced you?" But it's like, no, it's all that's the stuff that's happening in the world. That's the stuff that's happening in the background. But this story just happens to be about a brute warrior who is only concerned with chopping people's heads off and causing as much destruction as possible. And so you don't always get all of the depth of the lore. You really only get the bits and pieces that she kind of overhears as she's going through this quest. And but as the her friend Yaga the hermit is trying to give narration, and then she'll tell her to shut up and get out of the way so she can go do something else. So it's you got to pay attention to kind of the things that are going on in the background and in the art. Um and kind of draw some of your own conclusions about the state of the world. So yeah, pulp storytelling is awesome, and there's always been more to it than meets the eye in a lot of cases. It's that
Mhm.
um, it's that style of storytelling and that style of creative, um, whether it's film or whether it's the prose or comics, it's comics and media that just like they go a step further than you expect them to. There's more to them than meets the eye. There's depth of flavor in that stew. That maybe doesn't look like it would have that kind of sophistication, but that's always the kind of thing that I've appreciated about it.
Cool, cool, yeah. Um, Now, in terms of the work that is happening right now, please tell us about the latest part of the Maru Kiru journey, and please tell us about where we can find more information.
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe that when this episode goes up, the campaign will be live for
Hmm.
issue 3. So of course, the easiest way to access everything that I do is just go to my website, which is brendanalbetsky.com. And you can find links there to everything that's going on. Of course, if you're on Kickstarter, you can really just search for Maru Kiru, and you'll come up with the campaign. Um, I think that you're probably playing some images of what I sent you on the screen right now.
Hmm.
So yeah, I
Yes,
can
I am.
dive into it. Every time I make one of these comics, I want it to be the best art that I've ever done on a comic. And this is actually my second crack at doing the first issue of this new arc, this Chosen Ones arc that I've been planning for so long now. In 2024, I actually drew an entire full-length 24-page issue. And I even released it digitally. And then a couple months went by, and I looked at it and said, "I don't like this," and I took it down, and I pretended it didn't happen, and I started working on this one instead. Um, and I had a lot of pages even that I had started going up beyond past that I tossed out because I said, you know what, I am not meeting my mandate to myself, which is to do my very best ever work every time I release one of these. So I can definitely say now that the artwork in Maru Kiru Destroy the Moon, the Chosen Ones, number one, which I know is a mouthful, but the it's the best work I've ever done, and it's the work I'm definitely the most proud of. Taken some, I always take some weird liberties with lettering and with paneling and with the way I use splash pages and insets. But it's just become such a style of storytelling that I've become so comfortable with that it's me on a page, you know. I
Mhm.
read something recently about people saying that they're tired of seeing people say only their most introspective work is deeply personal. And it's like, yeah, no, this is deeply personal. It's mostly a lady chopping people's heads off, but it's definitely deeply personal. It's very close to the heart for me. And they're characters that I've really grown to love through working with them, and I want to explore their adventures in the deepest and most full way possible. So I hope that comes through in the art. There's a lot of new characters in this arc. It's called the Chosen Ones arc. That is something, a naming convention that I came up with, kind of in the way that Berserk titles its story arcs. I just like the
Mhm.
idea of actually upfront in the arc, just saying like, this is the story arc that you're currently reading, and this is kind of the theme that you need to keep in mind as you're reading through the arc. So there's a lot of new characters, and they all kind of have their own reason for thinking why they are the chosen one, so to speak. And that's what we're going to be exploring in this arc. So there's going to be an indeterminate amount of issues to go through this arc. This is going to be the biggest arc I've done so far, for sure. And I expect it will probably span multiple volumes of trade paperback. Um, this is, a full-length 24-page issue that we're doing here. And I have used every page, including the front and the back cover, to tell the story. We're wasting no time here, no paper, all killer, no filler. I stuck my credit information and my copyright stuff. I stuck it on the bottom of a little title page with a huge pinup illustration on it. So it's like we're gonna pack every single page with the good stuff. So no worries there. And the work on the interiors is done. Even now at time of recording, I actually finished working on the interiors yesterday. So the comic
Nice.
is completely done. I've got some quotes out for printing right now. It's really just going to be a matter of getting it printed and getting it fulfilled out to the backers. So I'm really excited. It's like it's the position you kind of want to be in when you start a campaign, but it's also the kind of thing where it's like, well, nothing to do but sit here and twiddle my thumbs until that clock runs out. So,
Right, right. Very cool. Well, congratulations on the success of that, and may
oh,
it
thank you.
continue. Yeah, and I was listening to an interview earlier today with Stephen King. He was talking about how there are writers who sort of have like that very last line in mind,
Hmm.
and there are also writers who sort of let the journey unfold. So,
Sure.
uh, curious about that part of the process for you before we close out. Anything that you'd say about how the characters may have surprised you so far?
Oh, sure. There's definitely a little bit of both because I do try to plan out my stories as best I can. I usually work from an outline. So I'll put the beats that I want to achieve, and I'll kind of make this roadmap for where I want them to go. But they step off that path all the time. They said, like they said, several times, and even like I was talking about with the last year with throwing out a completed issue to start over. it was just one of those moments where you look at it and you go, this is not what they want to do. This is not what they want to be doing. They want to do something else.
Hmm.
I forced the characters into this situation that they're not, it's not even that they can't handle it. It's just that they wanted to do something different. So, you got to listen to them and make the best book you can. So, yeah, I think you're always going to find out, at least I am always going to find out new things on the journey, and these are strong and willful characters. So yeah, they definitely have a voice of their own, and they definitely take their own path. And sometimes I need to make sure that I'm keeping up with it. So
Yeah. Cool, cool. Well, many thanks for the chat. Many thanks for the opportunity to talk through the book. Have we missed anything that you want to make sure to include that wasn't on the list, or anything that you want to re-emphasize before we close everything out?
we hit the points of all the like the cool artistic stuff that I would want to talk about. The one thing that I would want to mention is we just talked a little bit about past funding and projects on Kickstarter, the business angle
Mm-hmm.
of it, which I have done before. This is the second campaign that I've run personally. My first campaign was funded in the first day. We ended up hitting like 276% of our funding goal. That was for the first Maru Kiru campaign where we did volumes 1 and 2 together. So, I want to keep that going with this one. I hope that the fans are back and ready to support that again. I've also done work as artist for a couple of campaigns that have had, real great success. Circuit Champ with John Solito and Wild Hair Comics. That was a successful campaign that happened last year. That's a great book as well. The World Ends in Fire with DC Horn and Zankind Entertainment. We've done 5 issues of that now. So it's I've had some good times on crowdfunding, and I'm really hoping that those good times continue.
So absolutely, absolutely, and glad to talk about any projects that you have in the future and on the
Oh yeah.
horizon, and glad to chat with you anytime.
Thank you very much, Jason. This was a great time, and I really appreciate you having me on.